Ben Hogan chipping. How did he do it? Should you copy it? Let's take a look. Alright, so interesting thing, I think back when I was growing up and still today, everybody teaches you cannot use your wrists when you putt or chip, so everybody looks, especially with chipping, like that at address, and they all look very stiff, which works. So why did the really great players from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, you'll see some of this action, which we see in Mr. Hogan's chipping. Maybe they were more talented than us in using their wrists, who knows. But let me give you my take on what I think he did, even though we're going to obviously look at the video clips. Besides, preliminary setup, feet close together, I'm sure he had a little bit of weight on his left foot. I'm sure he had a pretty weak grip, and the club face open just a smidge. And I think his objective was to use some of the bounce. So if he was making that little swing up here, I think his arms were kind of soft, weight was a little left, hinge that way, slowly turn the chest, let the wrist unhinge, and then he was so good he could catch it and then support it post impact. Left elbow stayed kind of folded, chest turned a little bit. So obviously it's a useful technique. You just have to practice anything. So let's give it a little feel. Don't think you can see the ball, so I'll move up. How about there? Okay. So weak grip, club face a little bit open, little hinge, little turn and hold. Sure it works. It did work. Something you'll have to play with, but I think it's a good piece to add to your short game arsenal. All right, let's dig in, see what we can find. It's not easy to find a lot of video of Mr. Hogan chipping, probably because he hit a lot of greens. This clip, not going to be able to see a lot except a very short backswing. Okay, that's the end. So you can tell not much moved except hands and the club head. And then follow through, very short on this one. This is obviously what I call a chip or a bump and run. And it's going to go a little past the hole and then go back towards the hole a little bit. So we would take that. Next one, observations on this. Obviously going to stand pretty close to the golf ball. What Mr. Hogan called an open stance was really a square stance. Then you pull the left foot back away from the target line. That's what he used. And after that, we're not going to be able to see anything except the ball, because you can see there's the movement of the stroke, and that's it. So here comes the ball, lipped out. Luckily, they moved the camera. So from this perspective, arms are soft at the elbows, ball is pretty far forward, and this is pretty straight face club. I would guess like maybe a 6 or a 5 iron. So pretty relaxed, no stiffness evident. Unfortunately, after that, we're not going to see the mechanics except a very, again, short looking motion. And this time, right in the hole. Next clip from a clinic that he did. So this one will kind of capture a little bit more information Arms again look soft at the elbows, no tension in the shoulders. Pretty standard Hogan grip. Probably has the face open some amount for sure. Now that's just a talking rehearsal, but you can see basically there's probably a little bit of retraction of the right elbow, slight amount. And then he's just going to point the grip away from his body towards the target. Okay. And sorry, that's so hard to see with how his hands are moving because of the black and white and the sun location, but there's kind of a pretty good picture. And then he's going to go ahead and chip this one out there. That looks slightly different, right? Maybe a little bit wider, a little bit more trunk rotation as he hinged. And then he's going to kind of hold that hinge. I mean, he's going to let some of it go, obviously. But it's not a flip. It's just kind of a hinge and unhinge with a gentle turn is what I would kind of describe it as. And we'll see, that's something he commonly did. Kept the left elbow pretty soft in the finish. Now here's probably the best one to look at, and there's not going to be much going on. It's going to be a pretty mid-trajectory shot, obviously not very far. I'm going to guess maybe a 30-foot, 35-foot chip shot. Again, observations will be narrow stance, arms look comfortable, not tense, not ramrod straight. Very brief backswing, a slight amount of rotation in the chest. And again, the button of the club, which was pointed at him, is now pointed somewhat close to near the target. But he didn't go all the way, obviously, because the shaft didn't get parallel to the floor or the ground. And even though it's blurry, we can see a rough estimate of the club face angle. So it's not hooded, and it's not really looking drastically rolled open. So I'm thinking this is just a very straightforward bump and run with probably a somewhat pretty lofted iron. And let's take a look from there. Okay, so let's pop up and we'll let the right hand screen scroll a little bit perhaps, or maybe not. Let's see. Okay, I didn't want you guys matched up. All right, so let's go back to, there we go. Impact is there. Let's try to get both frames where the guy's gone. Okay, so address, impact, address is on the right, impact's on the left. Not a lot of change, right? So there is some hinge, but it kind of looks like he lets it all go really close to the amount that he had at address, and then he lets that chest turn through and support the club. And you'll see it's basically like probably very similar to impact. So it's like a hinge, a turn and a hold the hinge once it releases back to a address location, and it never really like scoops past him. So pretty different perhaps. And there's again the folded left elbow. A little different than the way we are commonly taught to do chips these days. Let's go back to single screen, and we'll just let this scroll a couple more times. It's the same shot over and over, but Let's kind of look at, it's hard to see. Let's see if we can get one more clear image. Okay. Back of the left hand looks like it's facing the target. Now it certainly appears to be as if it would be pointing at someone pretty close to in front of him. And it looks to me like it's slightly angled down to the ground. So I'd say, obviously he had a lot of different shots that he could hit with a very similar technique. But kind of what I wanted to investigate was, why did these guys back in the 40s, 50s, 60s chip with their wrists or some amount of wrist activity? And now it seems to be like that's a real negative thing to do. Probably because for them it helped accentuate some feel. And I think, at least for me, if I try to be like a triangle at address with stiff arms, stiff elbows, stiff wrists, yeah, I can become very successful at the contact, but it's harder for me to feel distance control in my shoulders. So probably that's a big reason they were able, or they chose to chip that way, plus they were able to control the low point of the swing and not, do the things that common players do. Hit it fat, scull it over the green, chunk it on a basic 25, 30-foot chip shot. They didn't have that problem. They were pretty well trained in what wrist mechanics they used and how to use them and how to time them. So there's Mr. Hogan's chipping. Hope you enjoyed it. Post your comments below, and we'll talk to you soon.